All right, so blood pressure. What is pressure? Because if you don't know what that is, it's hard to understand what blood pressure is. So a pressure, just pressure in general, is a force. It's a force applied to a surface. So we could say that pressure equals the force divided by the surface area. And we measure that in the body in milligram or millimeters of mercury, millimeters per mercury. So pressure is force over, or force applied to a surface area. That's, if you're standing on something, your body weight is the force on that something, whatever it is. Okay, so that's pressure. All right. So fluid creates a pressure as well. So fluid creates a force on its container, which makes sense. So you got fluid in a container. The fluid itself is putting a pressure on the walls of that container. So blood pressure is the measurement of force applied to vessel walls. Okay, so that's blood pressure. So as far as terminology goes, we know that, again, blood pressure is the measure of force applied to vessel walls. So that's basically the pressure of your blood against the vessels in your body. So if you have decreased blood pressure, you have what we call hypotension. And in hypotension, if it's too much, you want to have low blood pressure, but if you have hypotension, you may end up with low perfusion. So that's basically the exchange of gases from tissue, or from blood to tissue, tissue to blood. So I'll put that on here. Capillary exchange. So pressure is good. You have to have blood pressure is good. You have to have it in there, and without it, you wouldn't be able to push nutrients from your capillaries into the tissue spaces. All right, increased blood pressure is hypertension. And hypertension is too much pressure, which can cause vessel damage. And damage creates inflammation. And this is what leads to cardiovascular disease. Because it will lead to plaque formation. And that could lead to things like heart attack and stroke and stuff like that. So hypertension or too much pressure is a bad thing. Too little pressure can be a bad thing as well. All right, so we need to look at how blood flows. And blood, the flow of blood, it follows a pressure gradient. So what does that mean? Pressure gradient. And if you remember when we looked at diffusion is the movement of a solute from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. That is a gradient going from high to low. Blood flow or flow follows the same type of thing, a pressure gradient. So it flows from high, an area of high pressure, to an area of low pressure. So basically from a high pressure zone to a low pressure zone. Resistance is the opposition to that flow. So basically friction. So just the blood rubbing up against the vessel walls, that's a friction. That is resistance. Okay. So the heart is what creates the pressure gradients that allow for blood flow. So it's the heart that creates the pressure gradient for blood flow. And remember, it's high pressure to low pressure. So if you think about it, that pump from the left ventricle into the aorta creates a huge pressure, a high pressure in the aorta. The arch of the aorta balloons out with all this blood going into it, which is a huge pressure on the walls of that aorta. And then as the blood flows from the heart, from the aorta, down through the systemic circulation, the pressure decreases all the way down. And then it gets to the capillaries and then out into the venules where it goes down even further. That by the time it gets back to the heart, the pressure is almost zero. All right, so we gauge the pressure and measure the pressure in the body two ways. You've got, what's a better color? So we've got systolic pressure. And systolic pressure is the amount of pressure in the aorta during ventricular systole. Okay, so it's not the pressure in the heart, it's the pressure in the aorta during heart contraction, ventricular contraction. Okay. Diastolic pressure is the amount of pressure in the aorta during ventricular diastole. So that's what creates the 120 over 80. So 120 would be systolic, makes sense, it's the higher number. There's going to be a higher pressure in the ventricle or in the aorta during systole. And then the diastolic would be about 80. That's about normal. And that's the pressure then during relaxation. All right, so now we can talk more about pressure, where it comes from, how it's controlled, and all of that, now that we know what pressure is.